What happens when two of television's biggest personalities collide on live television in a way nobody saw coming? The Kelly Clarkson Show was supposed to be just another feel-good afternoon talk show episode, but what unfolded between Kelly Clarkson and Tim Allen became one of the most talked about moments in daytime television history. Before we dive into exactly what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us what you think about celebrity interviews gone wrong. Because this one is going to shock you. The studio audience was buzzing with its usual upbeat energy as Kelly Clarkson stepped onto the stage, flashing that familiar smile viewers had come to associate with comfort, warmth, and relatability. She wore a bright yellow dress that matched her sunny personality, waving enthusiastically as applause filled the room. Everything about the moment felt routine, safe, and predictable. This was exactly what fans tuned in for. Tim Allen was scheduled as the guest for the second segment, and the producers had framed it as a lighthearted reunion of sorts. Two television veterans, decades of experience between them, sitting down to reminisce, laugh, and maybe reflect on how the industry had evolved. Kelly settled into her chair, joked briefly with the audience, and then introduced her guest. The band played an upbeat tune as Tim walked out from backstage. He wore jeans and a casual button-up shirt, projecting the relaxed, everyman energy that had made him a household name. The crowd cheered warmly. Kelly stood to greet him with a hug, and for a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. They sat down, the applause faded, and the interview officially began. Kelly opened with an easy question, the kind designed to set a comfortable tone. She asked Tim what had kept him motivated and relevant throughout such a long career. Tim leaned back slightly, smiling, and replied that staying true to himself had always been the key. He talked about not chasing trends and about how, back in the day, they focused on making good television instead of worrying about constant scrutiny. There was a subtle shift in the air. Kelly nodded politely, but her smile tightened just a bit. She gently pointed out that television had changed, that awareness and inclusivity had become bigger parts of the conversation. That's when Tim's tone sharpened. He questioned whether things had actually improved, suggesting that comedy had lost its freedom in the process. The audience grew quieter. What had started as a nostalgic conversation now felt edged with tension. Kelly tried to keep things balanced, suggesting there was room for humor and respect to coexist. Tim, however, leaned further into his point, questioning what respectful even meant anymore. The temperature in the room shifted, and it became clear this was no longer a typical daytime interview. As Tim continued, his voice grew more pointed, and the playful atmosphere evaporated entirely. He spoke about how comedians were now expected to filter every word, arguing that humor had become trapped by fear. The audience, once relaxed and chatty, now sat in near silence, unsure whether this was a planned debate or something spiraling off script. Kelly maintained her composure, but her posture changed. She set her note cards aside, signaling that this was no longer a surface-level conversation. She responded calmly at first, explaining that awareness wasn't about silencing people, but about understanding the impact words could have. Some jokes, she said, didn't land the same way anymore because society understood more than it once did. Tim shook his head, clearly frustrated. He argued that comedy had always been about pushing boundaries, about saying things others were afraid to say. Without that edge, he claimed, humor lost its purpose. Kelly countered quickly, pointing out that pushing boundaries wasn't the same as being hurtful. Her voice rose just slightly, enough for viewers to sense that this was becoming personal. The exchange intensified. Tim accused modern culture of being overly sensitive, driven by social media outrage rather than independent thought. Kelly pushed back, emphasizing that respect wasn't about agreement, but about basic decency. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that she wasn't willing to let the conversation drift into vague talking points. The studio crew grew visibly tense. Cameras stayed locked on the pair as neither seemed willing to back down. Kelly attempted to de-escalate, suggesting they find common ground, reminding Tim that they both cared deeply about entertainment. Tim crossed his arms and challenged her, asking what common ground could exist between someone who believed in restraint and someone who believed comedy needed freedom to breathe. Kelly's frustration finally surfaced. She called out what she saw as oversimplification, explaining that adapting didn't mean losing authenticity. It meant growth. Tim responded sharply, saying he refused to change just to avoid offending people. The audience shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, others frowning, all aware they were witnessing something unusually raw for daytime television. When Kelly pointed out that having a platform came with responsibility, Tim bristled. He argued that success shouldn't require silence or compliance. Kelly countered that his career wasn't built on defiance alone, but on talent and opportunity, and that dismissing others' experiences was unfair. The conversation was no longer theoretical. It was confrontational, emotional, and unfolding live. With no clear exit in sight, Tim leaned forward, his voice lower but heavier, accusing Kelly of turning the interview into an interrogation. He claimed she had already decided he was the problem and was using her platform to paint him as a villain. Kelly met his gaze without flinching, asking him to clarify what he meant by people like you. When she suggested that perhaps he was uncomfortable being challenged by a woman who wouldn't back down, the room seemed to freeze. Tim's face flushed as he accused her of playing a gender card. Kelly's tone turned icy as she pointed out that disagreement wasn't discrimination and that he seemed unable to handle pushback without casting himself as the victim. The producer tried again to intervene, urging them to go to commercial. Kelly raised a finger, asking for one more minute. She turned back to Tim and firmly stated that she was ending the interview. She clarified that this wasn't about canceling him, but about her right to decide what conversations belonged on her show. Tim stared at her, then nodded slowly, a bitter smile crossing his face. He accused her of contributing to a world where honest conversation was impossible. Kelly responded quietly but resolutely, saying she would always choose empathy over cruelty. The audience remained silent as Tim turned and walked off the stage, his footsteps echoing through the studio. He paused briefly at the curtain, offered a final comment about the world Kelly was helping create, and then disappeared backstage. Kelly stood still for a moment, visibly shaken but composed. She finally turned to the audience, announcing a commercial break and promising to lighten the mood afterward. As the show cut away, the studio erupted into confused whispers. Viewers at home flooded social media with reactions, clips spreading rapidly across platforms. Some praised Kelly for standing her ground. Others criticized her for shutting down opposing views. The moment instantly became a flashpoint in the ongoing cultural debate about comedy, accountability, and free expression. What was meant to be a nostalgic, feel-good interview had transformed into a defining television moment, not because of a joke or a laugh, but because neither side was willing to retreat. And in that refusal, daytime television crossed into territory, usually reserved for late-night debates and cable news showdowns. In the days that followed, the clip dominated headlines and timelines alike. Fans dissected every word, every pause, every facial expression. Supporters of Kelly argued she had done exactly what a host should do when a guest crossed a line. Critics claimed she had abused her power by cutting the conversation short. Tim Allen issued a brief statement defending his views, insisting he had been misunderstood and unfairly portrayed. Kelly, meanwhile, addressed the incident on a later episode, reiterating that her show was built on empathy and respect, and that she would always protect that environment. The divide among viewers only deepened. Entertainment insiders weighed in, calling the moment unprecedented for daytime TV. Some praised the raw authenticity of the exchange, while others questioned whether live broadcasts should allow conversations to escalate that far. What no one could deny was the impact. Ratings spiked. Clips racked up millions of views. The confrontation became part of a larger cultural conversation. For many viewers, the moment wasn't about Kelly or Tim specifically. It was about a society wrestling with change, about how humor, speech, and responsibility intersect in a world where platforms are bigger and reactions faster than ever. The stage simply became the battlefield where those tensions played out in real time. Kelly Clarkson returned to her familiar warmth in subsequent episodes, but the incident lingered. It served as a reminder that even the most polished, feel-good shows could become unpredictable when deeply held beliefs collided. Tim Allen continued his career, unapologetic, embraced by those who saw him as a voice against cultural overcorrection. In the end, there was no clear winner, only a moment that forced audiences to confront uncomfortable questions. How far should comedy go? Where does accountability begin? And who gets to decide when a conversation has crossed the line? What started as just another afternoon talk show episode ended as a defining snapshot of its time. Messy, emotional, and impossible to ignore. And whether viewers agreed with Kelly, Tim, or neither, one thing was certain. Daytime television would never quite feel the same after that collision played out live before millions.